Welcome, everyone, to the Intentional Household podcast. Today, we are on episode 5, and our topic today is Help My Nanny Drives Me Crazy. We are particularly interested in covering this topic because it seems like a topic that appeals to so many people. Many families have nannies, but there are often a lot of complaints that come with having nannies. So we wanted to discuss why people are having those complaints and how you can strategize to overcome them so that you are working together with your nanny or your household support as a team and operating well together.
So Laura, I know when we came up with this podcast, there were many different ways we were going to title it. And when I came up with this title, I said to you that, hey, we have so many people that you're communicating with, other families. They have seems so many complaints about their nannies, communication issues, fighting with their nanny, or maybe you have a connection with the nanny and the nanny's telling you something about the other family, and it just seems like a big disorganized mess where no one is happy. But of course, no one's going to be happy. You want to know why?
Why?
Because the nanny doesn't know what they need to be doing. It's not properly communicated to them. And it's just assumed a lot of the time that the nanny will be doing something. So a lot of these issues are communication based. Would you agree? And could you give where you've seen some of the examples where you've talked to people?
Yeah, I agree that a lot of the time it comes down to communication. And if you think about it, you have these families who are hiring a nanny for the first time ever. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what questions to ask. So they really don't know how to be hiring a nanny who to best support them, right?
And I want to add, nor should you know.
No.
Because are you an HR professional for a corporation? Most likely not. And even if you went online and printed out some sort of form, and by the way, guys, I say this from experience. I have hired people in my business. I've done it all wrong because I know I've learned the hard way that I'm also not an HR professional. My thing is when I just assume the person knows what I want, and then I see the best in the person, and then in my head I create this fantasy land, and that's not reality. So a lot of people, and especially if you're parents and you're hiring a nanny, that means you probably have a young child, maybe just had a baby, and you're tired. You're exhausted, and all you're thinking about is help me, please help me, take this pain away.
That's right. So I think if I can go back to our first experience when we hired a nanny, I saw in a Facebook group that a nanny was looking for a family. And I think I had sent my sister questions like, hey, what are the questions I asked the nanny? The nanny came over, we met, and I thought, she seems so great, right? Like, we need to jump on this opportunity because another family is going to get this nice nanny. So let's jump on it, get her before someone else does. And we hired her. And then in the end, realized that she actually wasn't the right fit. Was she the right fit or was she the wrong fit? Now, looking back, it's hard to say because I didn't do all of these strategies and put all of these things in place that I do now to set her up for success.
Great point. It doesn't mean that the person you're dealing with right now is the wrong person. A lot of the time, it just goes back to that communication thing, setting up the boundaries, setting up the expectations, setting up the friction points where a lot of those things could be smoothed out over communication and what the expectations are, because you're assuming the person knows and they don't, because they aren't in your head. Again, saying this from, I am the most guilty of guilty persons. My wife will attest to this, even living with her husband, that she's like, how am I supposed to know if you don't tell me? The same thing applies to when you're dealing with a nanny.
That's right. So yeah, no one is a mind reader and you can't make assumptions about individuals. So I think what people want to know, though, is how can they turn it around to turn their frustration with their nanny or hired support into a relationship that is positive and effective.
I think what we'll start with, why don't we start with, and going through, like we'll start with how you would, like today, hire nanny, how
Yep.
you'd hire a nanny. So you go
Yes.
through that process. And then what we'll do is then we'll talk about, hey, you have a nanny. How can you see if you can fix the current situation? So let's maybe take from A to the end, B, and then we'll go and talk about, hey, here's how we could fix, how you would fix the current situation to smooth over the current situation. What
That's
are your
right.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. So
Well, I'll ask you the question. So if right now, Laura Wilson, you needed to hire a nanny, what is the first thing that you would do?
the first thing that I would do is I would list out all of the things that I don't want to do that I want the nanny to do. Okay, so I'm going to list everything out on paper. So it would be, taking kids to and from programs, occupying them during the day, taking them to, like, getting them outside for fresh air, doing activities with them that would enhance their learning, serving them lunch, cleaning up from all the meals, lunch and snacks. What else would I want help with? Tidying up. Sorry, this is like terrible, right? Like, I have a nanny and I'm having a hard time coming up
Well,
with this
it's because we've asked on the spot, but when
Yeah,
you sit when
I know,
when
but
you sit there and write down a list, you're coming from this list specifically for you. And even when you said this list, and I think one thing is very important, you said take my kid to and from activities.
Mhm.
There are going to be people that you're interviewing out there that do not want to take the child to and from activities. They may be upset, man, that's a kilometer and a half away, or I don't want to take the subway, or who's going to pay for the subway, right? So it's just like that one little line, by putting on a piece of paper saying that that's what I need, not even a want, because once you put it on paper, that's what you need.
Yes.
These are things that are non-negotiable. These are non-negotiable items that are important to you. And that's when you sit down there and you write them on a piece of paper. Now these are your non-negotiable items. So now you have your blueprint to go out there and look for a person. And then not only do you write the things that you want, you write the things that drive you crazy.
That's right. Yes. So I'm not going to go through the things that drive me crazy. But one of the things that a tool that we use that helps people determine if you can't come up with, like, I don't even know what drives me crazy, we're able to identify individuals' triggers by using the print report. And then we can take those triggers and put them directly into their profile so that they know that this drives them crazy. So one trigger for an individual could be too much talking, right? They don't want too much talking. They aren't there to be friendly with the nanny. And I'm just saying this, like, in my situation, if I had a nanny coming to the house, it's because they're there to support me on a Saturday while you're gone. And I want them to be there focused on the kids and not there socializing with me. Another one could be a trigger or something that could drive them nuts is being late, right? You want to make sure this person shows up on time. You don't want the schedule to be behind because the person is showing up late all the time. So just things like that, and putting it down on paper so that it's there and you can these are things you are going to communicate to the person when you're hiring them to make it crystal clear so that you don't have to address it later. They want to know what your expectations are, what drives you crazy, so that they aren't guessing. And I think a lot of the time they're kind of tiptoeing around and guessing, because expectations haven't been communicated clearly to them. And it's easier to do it at the very beginning than later on having to address it, which, I mean, we will get to that because some things will have to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So dealing with everything on the front end, and communicating at the beginning is so important. And it also gives you something where, when you're hiring someone to work for your household, you're going to want to do performance reviews as well. So when you do your 3 months, you hire someone, and after 3 months, you actually have a list to go over of things going, hey, are we doing these things? Or are we falling into these habits? It's just like running an organization. And we talk about intentional household, teaching people how to run their household like an organization, because it is an organization. And again, I always say, it's okay if you haven't done these things.
That's right. Yeah.
Because if you didn't know, or if it's not even in your skill set, that's okay.
That's right. So I would say, so the first step is for, if you already hired your person, they're working within your household. The first step is still to write down all of your needs and all of your expectations. If you've never done it, now's the time to start doing that now, right? You can always start fresh from this point moving forward. So you're going to write that down. Another thing that I like to do, and I get clients to do, is create household values. So I created household values for our household. And these are values, core values that I want the people supporting us to live by. Some of our things are getting better every day. I want someone supporting us who's constantly trying to self-improve and find ways to improve our systems and improve how we manage the kids in the household. So that is very important to me, getting better every day. Another one for me is loyalty, safety, and security, as you know, is very important to me. And I want someone who's going to come into our home and they're loyal to our family. They're not seeing what we're doing and then leaving the household and telling their friends and other family members about how we operate in the household and gossiping about us, or telling their friends, right? That is very important to me.
And I think, because it's so easy to talk about things outside the door, that if you communicate that to someone at the beginning,
Yeah.
and just continually emphasize that point, then they know, hey, this is something that's important to my collaborator, because I like using the word collaborator.
Yeah.
My employer, but we'll use the word collaborator, that it's important to them. So
yeah,
I'm not going to do it, because otherwise, they may say like, hey, this is, my workplace, and this is the family and all that kind of stuff. It can happen just naturally through conversation. But if you knew it was something that was so important, that privacy was so important, then you could have a mental filter going, oh, no, I don't talk about things outside of the household.
That's it. Yes. Like, please don't be talking about my business. And so those are a couple examples of, and so here's another one, punctuality, right? That is very important to me. We have schedules, we have places to be, the kids have places to be. So punctuality, reliability is huge. I cannot have someone who is constantly canceling on us. Anyway, you create these core values, and when you are hiring them and when you're doing the performance reviews, you are revisiting them and you are sharing them again, so that as a reminder that, are you living by these core values? And so they're constantly hearing them, so it's not forgotten. Because it's easy to set these expectations, these core values, and never visit them again. So you want to make sure you're constantly reviewing them together so that they can ensure that, okay, they are following them.
Laura, it sounds like you're trying to hire Mary Poppins.
Well, I mean, I have.
and that's where I wanted to say, and I love that that's how you answered it, because by putting this all in place, and when you do the interviews, you actually can find your own Mary Poppins.
Yes.
I've seen it. Like I've sat on the sidelines. Again, I personally couldn't do what Laura has done and brought these individuals in their household. It's way beyond my skill set. How Laura has brought individuals in the household and then provided the guide rails and instruction to allow them to become her Mary Poppins. It is 1000% possible. I've seen it happen. I've seen her do it for other people as well. So this is not something that can't be done. I loved it how she was going over values and what her expectations were, and the way she was talking about individuals. In my head, I'm like, it sounds like she's trying to hire Mary Poppins, and a devil's advocate might go like, that sounds like an impossible list. Not with the right systems and processes. You can find these individuals and they can become your Mary Poppins. They're not going to be Mary Poppins from day one, but they can become your Mary Poppins because with the systems and processes you have to guide them to make them work and perfectly fit within your household.
That's right. And so by communicating all of these things very clearly, they want to hear this, right? They want to know what is expected of them and how to let's just say perform or how to work within your household, right? Because it's a personal space.
Well, I want to say like they are your household collaborators.
Mhm.
They want to collaborate with you to provide the expected result at the end of the day. But if they don't know what the expected result is that you want at the end of the day, then they can't become your Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
And you have to work with them to create the end result because it's a collaboration. It is collaboration.
It is. So we were talking about communication, but I was going to say another key factor here is collaboration. So rather than thinking of your support as your employee, I think that it's very important to think of them as your collaborator or a team member so that you guys think of yourselves as a team working together. You're trying to achieve the same goals, right? It's not me versus you, it's us. And how can we achieve this together? You're here to support me. And how can I support you as well? Right. So I think that mental shift can actually really help and improve the relationship rather than thinking I am the employer and this is my employee.
And I want to add something to this as well. You know, if you have a collaborator, a team member that's coming in your household that is helping you get the expected result that you want, and you're helping that person grow as an individual as well, the one thing you should never do when hiring is expect to have that person for life. You're better off hiring incredible talent you may lose one day. Because if you have the right systems and processes in place, you can then create another one. So by having someone that you see that, wow, this person's a superstar. Oh, I'm probably going to lose them because they have greater goals and ambitions. That's okay. Because also I'll add, as your family changes, your Mary Poppins expected result is going to change as well. And we've seen it in our old household. When you have a baby, what you require when you have a baby or a toddler is different from when you have a preschool, school-age children. And as those needs change, the expected result changes, and the individual you have in that spot may not fit that role anymore.
Yep.
And they will tell you that they don't fit the role anymore. We've had that as well, where it's like, okay, this is what I want to do. Now we're getting in a world I don't want to do. But if they're growing as individuals, they may grow out of the role as well and achieve more out in the world too.
That's right. You want to find someone who is a fit for your needs right now. I remember in hiring in maybe it was like 2018, 2019, or even like just I'm thinking pre-pandemic, right? And I had everything planned out. I had, okay, what I was going to do next year, what my vision was, the kind of person that I needed. And then the pandemic struck and suddenly my needs changed, right? And so I was planning for a year, 2 years out. And it's kind of like all of that was irrelevant, right? I wasted all that time planning 2 years out when I should have just been focused on the present and those needs because things can change so quickly.
Well, I can also add to at that time, you're only expecting to ever only have 2 kids, and that changed too. So
yeah, you just can't predict the future, right? And so the most important thing is finding someone who is a fit for you right now and then dealing with your future selves and needs when the time comes.
Because you can always find another collaborator that is going to fit that role. And when you have communication, collaboration, these things are all going to work themselves out because, as the role changes and the individual you have may change with that role or they will experience out of that role, and you're going to find a new person to put into that role. But again, if you have the systems and processes set up, it's an easy fit.
That's right.
And I can say we've had a lot of success, looking within ECE pools. So, going back, talking about these Mary Poppins moments, if you look at individuals that are trained in ECE, so early childhood educators, they've actually went to school to deal with your school age kids or your preschool kids. which is great because they actually have those skill sets of helping your children progress. And a lot of those individuals that are in those roles have come here. They're new to Canada, but they're looking for bigger things as well. So they're going to come in, they're going to suit the role for a couple of years, and then they move on. But again, your needs will move on as your kids age and your needs change.
That's right. And I also love the ECE because as a mom who isn't skilled in managing young kids, I have so much to learn from the ECEs. And when, it's like a lot of it is managing the kids and their tantrums or their fightings and what they're fighting, and what
No, I love
okay,
to
which
know how to
it's so challenging, right? And so for me to be able to turn to the ECE who is trained and may say like work in a daycare full time, they have experience, right? And so there's so much for me to learn from them rather than me always trying to guide them. It's a two-way learning
absolutely.
here.
Why I'm laughing and smiling for those that are watching the video. I was literally thinking this last night as my children were frustrating me, and I'm like, wow. I'm like, when I go to the wealth of knowledge that I learned when I was raised, well, I was raised with a threat of physical violence and punishment, and the things that were used against us when we were childs by our parents are no longer allowed or socially acceptable. So so to your point where you're learning things from ECEs,
yeah,
again, how are you expected to know how kids are raised these days? Because when you go back to the well of knowledge, when you're a kid and you were threatened with physical violence and punishment and everything like that, we just weren't raised that way. So again, you just don't know what you don't know. So going back to the ECs, we love the ECEs bring in because they deal with that every day in daycares, and they know how to deal with those situations. Unless you've been to school for those situations, how are you supposed to know? And that's practical experience. Well, that's not reading a book. They've practically seen this and dealt with those children's attitudes.
That's right. Another thing that I want to touch on that relates to communication and expectations is to never assume that, hey, no one here is a mind reader, right? If something is not being done and I'm frustrated and I'm thinking, oh, she didn't do that. The question I have to ask myself is, did she know? Did I communicate to her that I wanted this done, that maybe I wanted this moved or I wanted this task done? And if I think about it, no, I never communicated. So how is this person supposed to know that I wanted them, say, like, to clean up these dishes, right? Like, do I assume it? No, you should never assume. So if you have expectations that they're going to, for example, clean up after something, it's very important that you communicate it to them. So for example, if all of our kids come inside from being outside wintertime, they come inside, they dump all of their stuff in our foyer and no one put it away, and I'm frustrated, and I've never communicated to our nanny that I expect that everything is to be put away neat and tidy when they get back. Like, how do I have the right to be frustrated when I never communicated that? So another practice that I like to do in regards to communication is setting aside about 5 minutes every day to communicate to my support partner, right? Whether it's our nanny or our housekeeper, I want to set them up for success every day. So for instance, we have a Saturday nanny who comes, and if our schedule is irregular for the day, I always prepare her in advance. I'll send her a text message and just send her anything out of the ordinary so she knows what to expect. But day of, both for our housekeeper and our nanny who come, we do spend a couple minutes together, and I have a tool that I use. I will write out, like for our housekeeper, I have a daily overview of the day, including meals, times, groceries, priorities, and I will complete it and I will go over it with her, and I will ask her if she has any questions so that she has an opportunity to ask me questions. Because I think that is something that's often missed. We're always in such a rush and everyone's busy. But at the end of the day, can I afford 2-3 minutes to have a conversation with them to set them up for success? I can.
Well, and I think too, like going back to this, and we'll get into now talking about, well, help my nanny's driving me crazy in regards to you have a nanny. How can you fix the current situation?
Mhm.
But there's also having the tools. So when you're communicating with the nanny, you actually know what you have to say. So you talk about the first 5 minutes or letting you know your regular schedule. If you have what I mean by a tool, just a document where you're just writing your notes down,
Yeah.
going, hey, here's how here are my expectations. Here's a situation that I want to discuss and how we can change the expectations of that situation. Just don't try to wing it.
Yeah.
Take time to actually sit down, write down, collect your thoughts so you can properly communicate to the individual you're working with, collaborating with. Because again, it's an organization. How
Mhm.
would you handle this at work? How do you handle these situations at work or the company you own? You gotta treat it the same way and put these systems and processes and structures in place and communicate with the individual that's collaborating with your home. So going into that now, Laura, I have a nanny. We're having difficulties, communicating. We have a lot of problems. How will we start this process? And I'm kind of answering your question for you, but a lot of the stuff that we do is we do a lot of personality testing within our company, and we've extended that to our home. So I would let's talk about how, if you have an existing individual in your household, to better understand that individual, what are some things you would do with that individual?
Yeah. So it goes beyond personality testing. So it's using tools that
Yeah,
can,
yeah. Sorry, wrong word. I shouldn't say personality testing. You describe it.
yeah. So we use a couple tools to help us to learn more about the individual. One is Kolbe to understand both, how we operate. Like I'm talking about Alex and I within the household, but then using it on our support to understand how they operate. So are they individuals who like a lot of detail? Do they like to ask a lot of questions? And do they want me to provide them with specifics? Or do they rather want to see an overview, right? Do their eyes glaze over when I give them lots of detail and it just doesn't absorb? Because that can be frustrating if you're giving a lot of detail to someone who is not a detail oriented individual. And if you need someone who's detail oriented, then maybe you don't have the right person in the role, right? And then also thinking about, are they systemized, organized individuals, right? If you want them to create systems and routines for your kids at their baseline, do they have it in them to create these routines and systems, or do they have it in them to follow them if you're creating them? So anyway, we use Kolbe to understand how they operate. And then we also use PRINT, which is a kind of philosophy program that you can use. Also a tool for individuals to understand what drives individuals at their core, what their motivations are. And by doing so, you understand what their triggers are, what sets them off, and how they best communicate. So we use this, like I said, with our support at home, and it has improved our relationship significantly. And I have an understanding of how to best communicate. For instance, with our housekeeper, we communicate face to face. A text message that I send can be misinterpreted. So I make a point to have a face to face conversation. So it's tools like that I would suggest that all households use, whether they're starting to hire and look for help or whether they already have the support in place. Use those tools so that you can maybe like start over, right?
Yeah,
And put great practices in
and
place starting now.
and I would say, yeah, exactly. Going into it, if you have an existing collaborator in place, the first thing is you start with these tests so you understand the makeup of the individual and how they operate and their different motivations. That's step one. Then step two, what you would do is then talk about how you create that list. Here are all my expectations for the role. Here are the things that drive me nuts. And then you have that communication with the individual, and then you start building that whole system. And guess what? By doing all of this, a few outcomes can happen. Number one, they're fully aligned. They just need a better communication and those guardrails and know the expectations, and it's going to work out. Number two, they're going to be, wow, this role is not actually what I expected. This is not what I want, and I'm going to leave. And then number 3, it could be where you have these expectations with the individual and they're still not meeting them, and it's something where you decide that maybe they should be leaving. But if you don't do these things, you and the individual are just going to continue to live in this frustrating place where no one knows what the expectations are, and no one and everyone just sitting grumpy in the corner.
That's right.
Is essentially what it is. But if you understand how the person operates, and they understand how you operate too, that's important. Like through, like, you share your personality, not personality tests, but your Kolbes and your own prints with the individual, so they understand, oh, this is a trigger for Laura. And this is a lot of the, like, if you understand, these can help you understand what drives you nuts as well if you're not able to articulate it on paper. So
that's right. And I think that having these conversations can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people, and that's why they avoid doing it. But by using these tools, and we would do it together, you then would pick up strategies on how to best approach this subject with your support based on their unconscious motivators, or based on their results.
And that's
so it's kind of like a guide.
Exactly. And that's where intentional household comes in. We realize that these things may, as you said, uncomfortable, are not easy behaviors for you to start right in. But it's just like going to a gym. If you go to the gym and you haven't worked out in 5 years and you go and work out, it's going to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable. But if you get a personal trainer that's there to guide you and help you through this, you start to better understand, you build your capabilities, you build your confidence, and it allows you to eventually operate on your own. So it's, everything we say in here may seem overwhelming, but if you have someone that's going to be a guide, that's going to show you how to do these things and work with you hand by hand, it's going to show you how to do them, again, build the capabilities, and then allow you to build the confidence to eventually do these things on your own. And that's our ultimate goal, is to help build people's capabilities and confidence to allow them to run their household like an organization.
Yeah.
And then they get to live an intentional life.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the key things that we talked about today in turning things around with your nanny is communication, collaboration, and using tools to support one another so that you can achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. If you like what you heard today and want to learn more, check us out on Instagram at Intentional Household, YouTube, and follow me on LinkedIn.